The Oklahoma City Thunder started their draft night at number 2, and for me, had the second best draft of any team in the NBA. OKC went home with Chet Holmgren at number 2, Usman Jang at number 11, Jalen Williams from Santa Clara at number 12, and Jalen Williams from Arkansas at 34. This is quite a haul for OKC, who were fully in the middle of their rebuilding phase, but now all of a sudden things look a little brighter in the short term and definitely in the long term in Oklahoma City. Let's begin where the Thunder did with Gonzaga big Chet Holmgren. Holmgren was the number 1 player on my big board headed into last Thursday. The expectation was that Jabari Smith would be the first overall pick, but when the Orlando Magic selected Paolo Banchero instead, it seemed like OKC confirmed that Chet was also first on their big board when they still took him. As a freshman at Gonzaga, Holmgren dominated from just about everywhere on the floor. First, he was lethal at the rim, where he made over 80% of his shots at the basket. Obviously, he's skinny, but Holmgren plays with a really wiry strength and toughness that makes it tough to knock him off his spots, even at under 200 pounds. This applies on both ends of the floor. On offense, Holmgren finished everything that Gonzaga gave him at the basket, but he's also a monster rim protector. In his only season for the Bulldogs, Holmgren averaged nearly 4 blocks per game. He engulfs everything that comes his direction with his length and projects as an absolute terror, either staying under the rim or coming over from the help side. On the perimeter, I think Holmgren will be fine in the long run. He is so tall that he can be a bit upright at times, which makes him prone to some rough sequences. For instance, here's his future OKC teammate Jalen Williams having his way with him. But more often than not, Holmgren can hold his own in space and even make it look easy almost. I'm incredibly bullish on Holmgren, and I'm confident that at this moment in time, he is the number 1 prospect in this draft. Because once we get away from the rim, Holmgren still has so many avenues to success. He didn't show off his package from the mid-range as much at Gonzaga, but I think we've seen flashes in high school, in FIBA competition with USA Basketball, and even pulling up in college. I'm not saying Holmgren will ever be a guy getting ISO after ISO on the wing, but I do think there's a future in which he is lethal, operating off 1 or 2 dribble jumpers. Finally, from the outside, I'm also a believer. Holmgren made 39% of his threes on good volume, over 100 trays on the season. Most of these threes were assisted, but I'm not expecting Holmgren to have to create his own shot from deep too often. This is also why I like the fit in OKC. The Thunder were the worst 3-point shooting team in the league, more on that later, because even though I don't think Holmgren solves that problem by himself, he is a means to address it. Chet does not have the fastest release from deep, but at over 7 feet, he is so fluid, and he has such a soft touch that the speed doesn't matter that much. I expect him to be able to knock down his spot-up looks, all the while punishing others at the rim, at times being able to generate his own offense, and playing lockdown, multi-positional defense. At number 11, the Thunder drafted French wing Ousmane Dieng from the New Zealand Breakers. The 19-year-old Frenchman played in the Australian League last season as part of their Next Stars program. And again, he showed why going down under remains a strong path for prospects with NBA hopes. For Jang, it was really a tale of 2 seasons. I've gone over his trajectory in New Zealand before, so I won't get into it too much here in this video, but basically there's one stat which I think tells the story with Ousmane Jang. Over his first 10 games of the season, he shot 5 of 36 for 14% from 3. In his last 10 games, that figure went up to 37%. That improvement and those flashes of brilliance that Jang showed constantly during his first pro season with the Breakers is probably why Sam Presti feels good about moving up and taking him at 11. It was a complicated draft night trade, especially live, but the Thunder acquired the 11th pick from the New York Knicks in exchange for 3 protected first-round picks next year. So why did the Thunder like Jang so much? Probably, if I had to guess, it starts with his playmaking. Like I said in my mock draft video, Jang's long-term chances in the NBA are more reliant on his initial role than perhaps other prospects. If he's used as a spot-up shooter who doesn't get many touches on the ball, Jang showed in New Zealand that he will be a passenger. But if OKC trusts him to make plays with the ball in his hands, the story changes completely. Next season, maybe this comes with reps in the G League. Maybe it comes from an NBA floor on day 1. But if there's one thing the Thunder have shown, it's that they're not afraid to give long, rangy, fluid wings the chance to handle the ball. If he pans out, then Jang has already shown potential handling the rock in the pick and roll, creating threes for other, passing over defenses, and generally just getting pretty creative with his reads. On defense, again, it seems that it's versatility that OKC is targeting. Jang is not overly athletic in terms of running and jumping, but he is long and fairly agile. Like Holmgren, there's times where his high center of gravity works against him. More than Chet, Jang in particular plays with high hips, which makes it hard for him to get down in a stance and sometimes guard the ball. But at the same time, Jang again showed improvement on this side of the ball as the season went on. Towards the end of his stint with the Breakers, New Zealand was genuinely using Jang as a Swiss Army knife on defense. Wrong nationality, but the intentions were right. Jang might not have the foot speed of a guard per se, but he has the fluidity, the understanding, and the length to cause them problems. Against bigger wings and forwards, Jang is already 6'10", if not taller, so the size mismatch does not exist. The physicality was a struggle in the NBL at times, but he dealt better as the months went by, and I'm not sure there's as many bruisers in the NBA that Jang should be asked to defend. Despite trading up to draft Usman Jang, Oklahoma City kept its original 12th pick and used it to select Jalen Williams. More on this in a bit, but this is the Jalen Williams coming out of Santa Clara after 3 years in college. Safe to say he was one of the biggest breakout stories in this entire draft cycle. In high school, Jalen Williams grew 8 inches from when he was a sophomore to when he was a senior. Then he kept growing at Santa Clara and now stands at about 6'6" with a ridiculous wingspan over 7'2". But in the meantime, Williams maintained the guard skill set that he grew up with, so what we're dealing with is yet another super long ball handler, except that Williams is also someone who I really trust with his shots. I liked OKC's draft as it was happening, but the more I thought about it, the more I'm into the idea of Chet Holmgren patrolling the paint on both ends, Ousmane Dieng being the high upside, playmaking wing type, and Jalen Williams being the guard who might really address OKC's shooting woes. Now, a bit of a role adjustment will be needed, but Williams' shooting splits at Santa Clara from his junior season are really worth marveling at. To start, the future Thunder guard shot 40% from 3 this year. Obviously that's good, it gets even better when we break it down more. When Williams was coming off a screen, he hit more than half of his threes. On catch and shoots, Williams shot 48%, and he was in the 97th percentile on spot-ups. Last season, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was the second most doubled player in the NBA, but OKC shot a dismal 32% from 3. Certainly, Williams could come in handy there. Because when we take his shooting numbers into account and consider that Williams has measurements comparable to guys that can slide down to the 4, I think it's easy to see why OKC is excited to have him in town. At the same time, I will say, if this is the role they envision for Williams, some adjustments are likely going to be necessary. The biggest one that comes to mind is that Williams was the guy at Santa Clara and he will now be a role player at OKC. Because even if Chet does not become the main guy, the list is long, with Gilgeous-Alexander, Josh Giddey, maybe Lou Dort, maybe even Jang, and who knows about next year's draft. At Santa Clara, nearly 2/5 of Williams' possessions came as a ball handler in the pick and roll. To be clear, he was wonderful there, both when it comes to pulling up and creating for others. I'll get into his passing in just a bit, but before that, I want to make clear, Williams was a hyper-efficient scorer from all 3 levels at college last year, so maybe I'm just worrying to worry. But at the same time, I do think Williams has a bit of a difficult shot diet. Not just that, but I think the shot diet he commanded at Santa Clara will be tougher to ask for in the NBA. Not so much maybe because of him or his percentages, but really because I'm still curious to see how this roster construction will work. In a way, OKC is stacking up on player archetypes, which I'll get into more later, but let's see if anyone falls by the wayside. Objectively, Williams might not give us much to worry about though. He made 41% of his 2-point jumpers on high volume while basically creating all of those looks for himself. He was even better at the rim, where Williams was actually more efficient with his off left hand than with his natural right hand. My concerns at the basket are more so with his athleticism. Williams is a good athlete who can get up for a big dunk or two, but usually only when he has a runway. I think he can still stand to improve his finishing through contact or over length. He's not an explosive, quick twitch athlete. He's much more someone who plays at his own pace, and so far, this has worked really well for Williams. This was especially apparent with his passing, where he was a plus all year long for Santa Clara. Like I hinted at earlier, 38% of Williams' possessions were as a ball handler in the pick and roll, and there his playmaking was awesome. I'm not even saying flashes, because let's not forget that Williams was a junior entering the draft. When Williams passed out of a ball screen, Santa Clara's points per possession skyrocketed. He got plenty of reps doing this and excelled, posting about a 2-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio and keeping his turnover volume low. I'm not sure how much of the ball Williams will handle with Josh Giddey and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the same team, but I am very curious to see how OKC's rebuild continues and where he fits. With their last pick of the draft, OKC went with Arkansas big Jalen Williams. Williams comes in at 6'10", but with only a 7'1" wingspan and also a smaller standing reach. Williams is a bit small to maybe play the 5 full-time, but we've still seen other forwards with his measurements. For example, Amari Stoudemire is really similar in terms of length and size, come into the NBA and have success. Not just that, but Williams has youth on his side. He only turned 20 years old today, June 29th. Now with J. Will, it seems like OKC is really betting on this strong, sort of tweener 4-5 type of guy, like Jeremiah Robinson Earl. Similar to JRE during his stay at Villanova, Williams has definitely flashed multi-positional selfless defense alongside some ball skill. When I say selfless D, all we gotta do is look at the numbers. Williams led the NCAA this past season with 54 charges, but if we delve into the rest of his game, it is pretty limited. Of course, I'm mostly referring to Williams offensively, not so much defensively, because I do think that he can be a switchy guy, although it might take a couple years for him to come around. But if we look at another guy in Jalen Williams' mold to some extent, that's Grant Williams. Until his three-point shooting got really good, Grant Williams sort of lacked an NBA skill that gave him consistent playing time for the Celtics, and I feel like the same might happen for Jalen Williams early on. Last season, he only made 24% of his threes, and all of them were assisted. His numbers from 2 were much better, but there's no real point in him spacing out to only the deep 2, for instance. Like I mentioned earlier, Williams also is not a fantastic athlete. He finishes more through craft and intelligence rather than pure pop. At the rim, Williams converted on just under 60% of his shots, which is for sure lower than other bigs, so it will be a bit of an uphill battle. Williams is an undersized, below-the-rim athlete who's going to be competing to play the 4 or the 5 on a stacked roster. But Williams is also still a super young, clever player with defensive know-how, versatility, and ball skill. I don't know that he's a first contract type of guy, but I do think he will stick around in the NBA.